Following his criticism of their lawsuit against Vizio, the Linux creator Linus Torvalds says that the Software Freedom Conservancy, quote, is trying to further an agenda and is, quote, a racket, plain and simple. He then went on to say that they are, as an organization, quote, just pure trash. Holy heavens. Linus Torvalds is not one to pull punches. Never has been. That's why people both love him and hate him. But this is fairly significant, not just from the pure entertainment value of seeing Linus unload his unfettered opinions on someone, but this is fairly significant because of who the Software Freedom Conservancy is. I want to walk you through this story step by step here. So on December 26th, I reported that over the previous few days, there had been some motion in the Software Freedom Conservancy versus Vizio lawsuit. And that lawsuit is basically summed up simply by saying that the Conservancy says that Vizio has not been in compliance with the terms of the GPL license in relation to a bunch of their products, like some of their smart TVs and whatnot that contain Linux and a lot of other GPL licensed pieces of software in it, and Vizio had not, in their opinion, complied with the terms of the license. That lawsuit is ongoing. It's still continuing forward, but the Software Freedom Conservancy had suffered some setbacks. Some of their requests had been denied by the judge. The judge slapped them down pretty hard, including seeming to say that the Software Freedom Conservancy's interpretation of the license didn't make sense legally. It was a pretty intense slapdown that happened last week. Linus responded to all of this by saying that the Software Freedom Conservancy's lawyers, which is the head of the Software Freedom Conservancy, Karen Sandler, look like, quote, a bunch of incompetent beep holes. Yeah. Karen Sandler, the head attorney for the Software Freedom Conservancy and the executive director, replied with just a tirade of intense Karen-ish snarkiness, saying, quote, maybe you didn't read, and suggesting that he talked to people and stuff like that. It was extremely passive aggressive, and then I reported on all of that because it was entertaining to me. But then Linus continued. Things really kept ratcheting up from there, and I want to read to you some of the statements that Linus Torvalds made in relation to the Software Freedom Conservancy here. But before I read those quotes, I want to show you the Software Freedom Conservancy. So if you go to sfconservancy.org, you'll see their webpage. And the Software Freedom Conservancy, as they say on the website, is a nonprofit organization centered around ethical technology. Our mission is to ensure the right to repair, improve, and reinstall software. We promote and defend these rights through fostering free and open source software, FOSS, projects, driving initiatives that actively make technology more inclusive, and advancing policy strategies that defend free and open source software, such as copyleft. And you can see they're doing fundraisers right now. Help us reach our goal of $423,000 this season to keep the Software Freedom Conservancy going until January 15th. The next $116,000 will be matched. They say that they've during this current round had $95,000 matched with $100,000 to go, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at their tax records, for their most recent IRS Form 990 filings, you see that they bring in a few $1 million per year. Last year, they brought in about $2 million. The year before, they brought in about $4 million. And depending on the year, they have between $5 and $7 million, it looks like, in the bank. So they're not hurting for money, but they're not some sort of, mega billionaire foundation like some of the other ones that we see. So what exactly does the Software Freedom Conservancy do? Well, they do lawsuits against corporations that they feel are not in compliance with the GPL license, like the Vizio lawsuit. They also host Outreachy. And those of you who follow the Lunduke Journal for any length of time will have heard about Outreachy before. The idea of Outreachy is very simple. They say that, quote, their goal is to increase diversity in open source. Past Outreachy interns are 92% women, 4% men. 4% transgender, queer, or non binary, 64% people of color, 12% from historically disadvantaged caste or tribe, etc., etc., etc. And if you dig into it, what Outreachy really does is they set up 3-month paid internships for people to work on open source and free software projects, which in and of itself, as a general concept, seems like a great idea. Get more people involved in free and open source software, pay for people to do work on that software, and kind of build up the whole ecosystem around it. Fantastic. Provide training, get projects some help. Good idea. The downside to Outreachy is that it is wildly, extraordinarily off the charts, racist, sexist, and generally discriminatory. In fact, there is a list of who they want to be members of Outreachy. Outreachy, quote, invites all applicants from any background to apply. Outreachy openly welcomes women, both cis and trans men, and queer people to apply. We also expressly invite applications from residents and nationals of the United States of any gender who are Black/African American, Hispanic/Latinx, Native American/American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander. Anyone who faces underrepresentation or systemic bias or discrimination in the technology industry of their country is invited to apply. Now they've added a few lines in here to try and kind of weasel their way around this. Like they've added this line in here. There is no list of groups that are eligible or ineligible for Outreachy. End quote. But basically, if you look at who's invited to apply and who has actually been granted those Outreachy internships, it's basically anyone but straight white men or straight Asian men. Right, so if you're a straight Japanese guy, no, none for you. If you're a straight Caucasian guy, no, no Outreachy for you. Right, it's an extraordinarily racist and sexist program. So this is what the Software Freedom Conservancy does. And so it's interesting to see Linus go after them. So I'm going to read some of what he posted here. He said, quote, the argument by the Software Freedom Conservancy, meaning the argument in the Vizio lawsuit, is complete garbage and always has been. There has been no question about the license, and I have made it very clear over the years, and the Software Freedom Conservancy knows that. So when they argue their incorrect reading of the GPL v2 in court, they're absolutely not doing GPL v2 enforcement. They are trying to further an agenda that is invalid and always has been, and is explicitly against the wishes of the actual copyright holders. So the Software Freedom Conservancy is just pure trash. Holy heavens. He continues, if they want to protect some project, let them protect a project that asks for it, not one that is known to not want their kind of protection. Basically, he's saying, hey, I've licensed the Linux kernel under the GPL v2, not the GPL v3. The Software Freedom Conservancy is suing Vizio in part because Vizio is using the Linux kernel and is not in compliance with the terms of the GPL v3. But the Linux kernel isn't licensed under v3. It's licensed under v2. And Linus Torvalds, he's the man with the plan here. He doesn't want Software Freedom Conservancy's help in this regard, right? He continues, because what they are doing is a racket, plain and simple. So clearly what he's insinuating is that the Software Freedom Conservancy is running a racket, is running a scheme to get donations, to get people to fund them when they're not really representing the people they claim to be representing, right? They claim to be fighting on behalf of the guy who owns Linux, the guy who created the Linux kernel, when in all reality, he doesn't want their help. In fact, he doesn't like it, and he disagrees with a huge amount of what they're saying. So whether you agree or disagree with the Software Freedom Conservancy's interpretation of the GPL v2 license, this is how Linus feels. He goes on. Do you think that the California Superior Court judge also misread what the Software Freedom Conservancy stated? Because that judge also found that their arguments to be lacking any basis in reality. Quote, the plain language of the arguments of the agreements does not support the alleged duty. He goes on to say where that alleged duty is the baseless arguments from the Software Freedom Conservancy about being able to reinstall the Linux kernel on the device. I think you didn't actually read the ruling, and you may perhaps have read just the flim-flam garbage that the Software Freedom Conservancy put out about the completely irrelevant issue of, quote, continuing to function properly, which was what Vizio was using as their reason for not releasing keys. Put another way, I can read because because Karen Sandler of the Software Freedom Conservancy kind of made it clear that maybe Linus can't read. Put another way, I can read. That Superior Court judge can read. I think you need to learn to read, and you need to take what the Software Freedom Conservancy then says in court and on their blog with a pinch of salt. I realize that other people like the GPL v3 and wish that the Linux kernel was under that license, but it is simply not the case, and never has been, and never will be. Deal with reality, not your baseless wishes otherwise. Holy smokes. Holy heavens. I mean, this is a fairly big deal. I mean, this isn't just Linus feeling snarky, right? Because we're talking about one of the most active organizations relating to GPL compliance litigation, right? The Software Freedom Conservancy really has been at the forefront of that, for better or worse. And they've also been heavily pushing a lot of the DEI and discriminatory policies within the free software world. And for Linus to come out and say and call them a racket, pure trash, trying to further an agenda, pushing flim-flam garbage, a bunch of incompetent a-holes, on and on and on. And working expressly against the wishes of copyright holders. I mean, this is pretty massive. Now, since this came out a couple of days ago, the Software Freedom Conservancy has not responded. They have not issued any statements relating to this. They have a post up on their blog that you can read at sfconservancy.org, where they go over their interpretation of how they disagree with the judge in the Vizio case and that the case is continuing onward. Of course, all of that Linus Torvalds calls flim-flam garbage and pure trash. Where it goes from here remains to be seen, but it does feel like the entirety of the free and open source world is far more fractured than it has been in the past. The open source world and the free software world and the world of Linux and the BSDs and everything has always had their contradictions with each other. They've always had their fair bit of infighting over one language or another, or one license or another, or various organizational concepts. There's always been that. We haven't had a year go by since I started covering Linux, decades ago, where we haven't had some sort of, call it drama, but really just some sort of conflict within various organizations within the free and open source world. But what we've been seeing over the last 2+ years seems to be escalating, and not in a easily salvageable way. Like when you see the statements coming out from Linus against the Software Freedom Conservancy, These aren't, it's not like Linus is just swearing a little bit here. He's making straight accusations that the Software Freedom Conservancy is running a racket, basically, that they're con men. And they're lying and deceiving people. That's what Linus clearly is saying here, right? They're running a racket, right? They're acting against the wishes of copyright holders. These are very extreme statements. And the impacts of those statements could be fairly far reaching in multiple ways within free software, not just with license enforcement, but in relation to things like this Outreachy program, right? What happens with Outreachy when Outreachy is putting DEI focused and woke agenda focused interns into projects like Linux and Linux related projects, when the lead of the Linux project is saying flat out that its parent organization is trash, incompetent a-holes, and a racket. It's If you're an organization that is giving money to Outreachy, to the Software Freedom Conservancy, that's going to cause you to stop for a second and think a little bit about what exactly is going to be the result of me contributing to this organization or providing support of this organization. And you've got to know that the Software Freedom Conservancy folks are seeing this and they're concerned. I mean, if you were them and Linus was coming after you saying what you are doing is a racket, that's going to cause you concern. Now, Linus has been wrong about a lot of things. Let's just be straight and clear about this here. Linus can come out and say something extreme and inflammatory, and sometimes he's really, really on the money, and sometimes he's wildly off mark. He has his opinions and he expresses them bluntly, and that's why we appreciate it, right? We like that approach because it gets the opinions out there, and it says things directly. He doesn't beat around the bush. He doesn't pussyfoot. He just says this is what I think, right? So it's very, very clear. So then, but that doesn't necessarily mean just because he said it that he's right. I disagree with Linus on a lot of things. I agree with Linus on a lot of things, right? Because he's a human and I'm a human. We're not going to agree on everything. So it could entirely be that he's wrong about all of this, right? But if so, it should be very simple for the Software Freedom Conservancy to rebut this. And as yet, they have not spoken out. Now, it should be noted that I have a very long history interacting with the Software Freedom Conservancy. I had one of their longtime founding members on the Lunduke Journal about a year or so ago, maybe a little more. Bradley Kuhn, if you go look up that past episode, he came on the show and he talked to me for over an hour, and to give him credit where credit's due, he's one of the few leaders within the free software world who is on the extreme left politically, but was still willing to sit down with the Lunduke Journal and have a discussion. And we had a discussion and disagreed about a tremendous number of things. So that's worth checking out. But I am not a huge fan of a lot of the things that the Software Freedom Conservancy does, like Outreachy. And do I think that the Software Freedom Conservancy is a bit of a racket? Yeah, I do. But what I think needs to be stated here is that there. I know what I'm about to say. This is very much, there's lots of sides to this issue because even with the GPL compliance, just the GPL compliance portion of what the SFC does, some of it is very, very valid, and some of it feels like a bit of a racket. And you can even see that just in the Vizio case. If you look into the details of the Vizio case, there are examples you can easily point to where you can say, yeah, you know what? Vizio as a company was absolutely not in compliance with either the letter or the spirit of the GPL in multiple instances. And in fact, has fixed that somewhat since this lawsuit began. But there are other points in the lawsuit where it also looks like the Software Freedom Conservancy is wildly overreaching, and they're trying to force Vizio to comply with a license that isn't part of the software they're using, right? They must comply with the GPL v2 terms or v3 terms, even though the software is GPL v2, and they have significantly different requirements. And so it does feel a bit like the Software Freedom Conservancy is pushing a very specific agenda. And that's not unusual for the Freedom Conservancy. They do push agendas regularly, like what we see with Outreachy. So all of this is worth paying attention to because for a million different reasons, but it really underlines the huge amount of disagreement and tension within multiple of the significant players within the free and open source world and within even just the GPL world, which is fairly wild. I want to say thank you to all of the Lunduke Journal subscribers for allowing this coverage to be possible. Really, if you weren't there making the Lunduke Journal possible, it wouldn't, none of this would happen. None of these stories would get told. So go to lunduke.com, grab a free subscription to the Lunduke Journal on any friggin' platform you want. Locals, Substack X, the podcast feed, YouTube, Patreon. It's all over the place. I mean, you can grab the Lunduke Journal on so many different platforms for free. And that's not accidental, right? You cannot censor and shut down the Lunduke Journal easily, because if any one of these platforms says, I don't like you, Lunduke Journal, your account is closed. Okay, fine. We're still on a bazillion other platforms, and people can get the shows and the coverage from the Lunduke Journal a million other ways. It's absolutely fantastic. And if you want to financially support the work of the Lunduke Journal, there's a lot of options there as well. In fact, through the end of the year, through the end of December, as long as it says 2025, you can grab an $89 lifetime subscription to the Lunduke Journal, which is pretty friggin' sweet. That's like less than a third of the normal price. Or you can get half off, 50% off a monthly or yearly subscription. All those details are up on lunduke.com. And if you do end up getting a lifetime subscription, you can get up on this fancy pants wall right here. Here's wall number 1. Here's wall number 2. And oh my gosh, wall number 3 is slowly filling up as well. Not so slowly. So if you want to be on this wall number 3, go ahead and pick up a lifetime subscription and then email me and say, hey, Lunduke, add me to the wall. I'm not going to add anyone unless you ask. So I'm not doxing anybody. I'm not revealing your identity as a dirty, evil Lunduke supporter. You just go ahead and get yourself on the wall if you want to. But even if you want to become a lifetime supporter and don't want to be on the wall, God bless you. You're fantastic either way. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.